All right, everybody, welcome back to the Big Ten show. All right, if you didn't know, we don't call it Big Ten show. It's the Big Ten show. And here's why, if you didn't know already. Plain and simply, Ohio State. Why isn't it just Ohio State Buckeyes or University of Ohio State, just like University of Nebraska, University of Colorado, University of Rhode Island? No, they're the Ohio State. Whatever. Actually, I got a lot of respect for Ohio State, but that's why we are the Big Ten show. And actually, originally, we were going to be the Big Ten football show. But ladies and gentlemen, we love to talk all sorts of sports here. We have guests from all sorts of genres and sports and backgrounds and histories. Okay, I grew up playing about a bajillion different sports, club sports, all the way through high school. I've coached them for umpteen years now. No, not like college or NFL or anything. Okay, but we love all sorts of sports. We talk Big Ten, and honestly, a lot of national sports too. Okay, we love national sports, I was going to say national football, not the National Football League, but football from across the nation here on the Big Ten show. I'm your host, Adam Carriker. All right, first of all, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, the Jacobson Seed Company. They are your healthy hybrid advantage, and I've gotten to know these folks just a smidge. Okay, they're really good people. They do a really good job. Check them out at jacobsonseed.com. All right, ladies and gentlemen, got a lot of basketball to talk about today. And I'm going to start, well, actually, if you can see my shirt, all right, if you can't see me because you're only listening, all right, my shirt says Snow Buddy Sled Dog Adventures. Now, we were on spring break last week, and we tend to go to Steamboat a lot for Christmas break or spring break. We love to ski. I've got kids who've skied and snowboarded, blacks on both. I got a 6-year-old who's been skiing on her own for a while now. Okay, I grew up not skiing a ton, okay, but every once in a while. And so we love to go skiing as a family. But we're probably not going to go back to Steamboat for a while because we've done it quite a bit. And we want to start to expose the kids to different things, go different places for vacations and whatnot. So this is really our last trip to Steamboat for who knows how long. And so we wanted to do something unique, something different. So my wife's looking up all these little excursions and whatnot. And, we've done quite a few of them. But we have 2 dogs at home, okay? And if you enter my house, my mini Aussies, they'll eat you alive. They're real guard dogs. No, they'll yip you to death, and then they'll want you to pet them to death. That's about all. But my kids love dogs, and not many people get to go dog sledding. So my wife found this dog sledding, adventure thing, kind of out in the middle of frickin' nowhere, let me tell you. There weren't even bathrooms when we pulled up to. Now, to be clear, the people do a great job. I want to be clear about that. But it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And who actually gets to go dog sledding with actual dogs, and your kids get to do it, and my kids love dogs. So anyways, I put a picture out on social media of my family and I dog sledding. First of all, I put it in the post. I felt really bad for the dogs who had to pull me. Okay, and then the lady in charge actually put my wife and I together. And obviously, we're the 2 biggest people in our family right now. And so she had like all the biggest dogs all in one sled. And I still felt bad for those dogs, especially when we were going uphill. We were supposed to run alongside them at certain points going uphill, and I did my best, but I ain't in the best shape. So I didn't do it for as long as I probably should have. But the kids had a blast. Our 8-year-old twins, our 6-year-old who probably loves dogs the most, obviously our 12-year-old, 11-year-old, etc. Okay, actually our 12-year-old got to drive, which was pretty cool. Our younger kids got to have a sled to themselves with a guide who was driving. My 6-year-old and 8-year-olds were not driving, but they were on the sled by themselves with a guide. They thought that was pretty cool. So it's kind of a little fun adventure that we did out in the middle of frickin' nowhere, out in Timbuktu, the mountains of Steamboat, Colorado, out in the backwoods, and it was kind of cool. And now that was not the first time that my wife and I had actually done dog sledding. We'd actually done it about 10 years earlier. The kids were so young, 3/4 of them weren't even here, and the ones who were here couldn't remember. And my memory of that was, it was a different place that we did it, and the people were not as organized. And we're going around corners, and my dogs kind of took off. It's really not that hard to do. They're going about 10 to 12 miles an hour. They actually listen really well. You got some basic commands, okay? It's really ready, hike, okay? Tells them to go. And easy, whoa, tells them to slow down. And then ha-ha means turn left. GG means turn right. I forget what go straight was. I figured if we were already going straight, why do I have to tell you to go straight? Really simple commands. But we're going around the corner about 10 years ago, the first time we did the dog sledding when 3/4 of my kids weren't here, and my dog sped up. And I don't know, whatever I did wasn't working because that sled about tipped. It was like millimeters from tipping over sideways and going flopping down the side of this big, gigantic mountain. Luckily, that did not happen. Okay, in the more recent dog sledding trip, there was no such adventurous occurrences. Very safe, very fun. Kids had a blast. All right, that explains the shirt that I'm wearing. Okay, if you could see it on YouTube or anywhere else, so you can see this video. If you're on sound-only podcast platforms and/or the radio, wherever you're listening to this, hopefully fine program in your opinion. That explains kind of our recent adventures in one of my most recent social media posts. The kids had a blast. In fact, my 12-year-old daughter, Addison, she's like, I want to be a dog sledder now growing up. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Iron Will. It's from like the mid-90s when like the Little Giants came out and Little Big League and The Sandlot and all these great youth sports movies came out. Check out Iron Will. It's a great Disney movie from the mid-90s, back when Disney movies were pretty good. No disrespect to current Disney movies now, although I don't know how that's not a little bit of a slam. But my point is this. I've never heard anybody else talk about it. It's like an underrated film. Go check it out. All right. Let's talk a little bit of basketball. We're going to start out with Caitlin Clark. Now, the all-time, as you know, NCAA scoring leader has had a couple of interesting occurrences early on so far in this NCAA tournament. Okay, in the most recent game versus West Virginia, she appeared to yell, and I somewhat quote, shut the F up. End of the somewhat quote. All right, while looking out at the home crowd in Iowa City, I might add. Now, ESPN cameras captured Clark and her teammates riled up on the court after what appeared to be a foul called on the 8-seeded West Virginia Mountaineers. Obviously, as you know, the Iowa women's basketball team is the number one seed. A number one seed, not the number one seed. That's South Carolina, who is just stomping a mud hole in everybody and walking it dry right now. They've won their 2 games so far in the NCAA tournament by over 90 combined points. And the last team they played was North frickin' Carolina. And I know the men are historically a little bit better at basketball at that school than the women, but the women are always really good too historically, no matter what. The tradition I'm talking about. They just stomped a mud hole in them and walked it dry, and it was not pretty, ladies and gentlemen. South Carolina is really freaking good, but Iowa is a number one seed in the women's NCAA basketball tournament. Now, Clark is a great player, and she's actually a great passer. She's known for scoring, but she leads the NCAA in assists, over 1,000 assists in her career to, set all these records for scoring points, but she has records in assists as well, and rebounds. She's pretty good at rebound, all-around player, okay? But she's had a couple of interesting occurrences so far in the NCAA tournament, from yelling what appeared to be shut the F up at the home crowd in Iowa City in their last game versus West Virginia to, I believe it was their first game of the tournament, okay? She's basically yelling at her dad during the game, and her dad complaining about the refs. She seems to be complaining about the refs an awful lot. And her dad basically from the stands appeared to tell her to shut up, which I freaking loved. Okay, now several people have called out Caitlin, who, to be clear, I've spoken about her multiple times before. I got nothing but respect for her. Love her game, love her unselfishness, love her skill, love her ability. Okay, she's probably going to go to the WNBA. She's going to be an immediate impact player. She might be the best player. That's tough to say, even though she'll be a rookie. Anytime you're going to be a rookie. But before she's said and done, she's probably going to be the best player in the WNBA at some point as well. So I got nothing but respect for her. But I have been kind of disappointed in some of the conductorial, I don't know if that's a word, but we're going to say it is, conductorial actions so far in the 2 games throughout the NCAA tournament this year. Okay? Now, just some of the tweets I saw are as follows. Every time I turn on the TV, Caitlin Clark seems to be whining and moaning. Okay, another one. I can't stand watching Caitlin Clark anymore. Another one says, I can't stand watching Iowa women's basketball because of Caitlin Clark. So, social media, everything's fact-based, 100% accurate, can't ever argue with it. Everybody on, the internet is 100% fair. Nobody's in any way, shape, or form a keyboard warrior ever. So keep that in mind when we're talking about these things. Now, here are my thoughts on this. Because I see both sides of the coin here. I know, at least to a degree, probably not Caitlin Clark level, what it's like to be analyzed. At least you feel like to the nth degree. What it's like to have everything watched. Like, when I was a rookie at the Rams, first round pick, my first practice, okay? Rookie mini camp. So it's like April, I think. All right. And it's just, I forget how many rookies there were of us, maybe 20, something like that, with all the free agents, whatever there was. I think we had enough to go 11 on 11, so probably 22 or whatever. Actually, there were some older guys who were asked to come to the camp with us, and they weren't very thrilled about that. So I forget how many total rookies there were in our class, plus the free agent rookies, et cetera, et cetera. And the first drill we ever did was just hitting bags, something I've done since middle school, okay? And there's 15 people out there in suits watching me, the first round pick. And I'm not talking just regular nice suits. I'm talking like, these are like $10,000 three-piece suits. There's like a dozen men, 3 women who are in like Hillary Clinton type fancy pantsuits, okay? And I'm just hitting the bag. And I remember thinking, wow, these people are all over me, and this is really freaking weird. And to be clear, Caitlin Clark, the level of scrutiny that she's under far exceeds me. You got to keep in mind, Facebook had just kind of started. Okay, I don't think Twitter was a thing. Maybe it was. I was still making fun of tweet at the time. Then it became acceptable. I mean, I don't think Instagram was around. MySpace may have still been a thing. Definitely no tickety talk at the time, so to speak. Ha ha. Okay, so the scrutiny that she's under far exceeds anything that I've experienced, but I do know a certain level of experience. And so I know how challenging that can be. That being said, you can't be constantly complaining like this. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. It's not cool. It's not the way it should be. It's not setting a good example for anyone who's watching the games, for any little girls, for any kids, for anybody in the stands. As an Iowa fan, I would be frustrated if I was an Iowa fan. So for me, it reminds me of youth sports. I got 6 kids. Okay, all my kids are on 3 teams right now. So yeah, that's legit. 15 different teams we're a part of. My wife and I coach several teams. Okay, and not 15. It's 15 because we have twins. So they're basically on the same teams. Otherwise, it would be 18 teams. But it's 15 because we have twins. And so we see all sorts of whining and complaining and moaning and everything else. And when I watched her over the weekend, I actually root for her, okay, because I actually like her all-around game. And I like that when Angel Reese mocked her in the national championship game last year, had like 10 million viewers or something, she took it in stride. She said turnabout's fair play because she had done it earlier in the tournament, I believe, to Louisville, Caitlin had. She's like, hey, turnabout's fair play, so to speak. She didn't make a deal of it. And I actually loved that and I respected that. Okay. Basically, if you give it, you got to be able to take it, which a lot of people are not in this day and age. Okay. But it's still unacceptable. It reminds me of a little kid at a youth sports game throwing a fit on an early Saturday morning. Okay. And it's just not cool. And it's not setting a good example. It's hard to watch. It's not fun to watch. Now, again, kind of going back to the immense pressure and scrutiny that she's under. It was funny. I was driving my son Jacob, who's 14, okay, to his baseball practice yesterday, and he goes, "Dad, you ever notice really famous people don't tend to live long?" And for whatever reason, he brought up names like Michael Jackson, etc., Elvis, some of the biggest names in history, not just your run-of-the-mill celebrities. And we were just kind of chatting about how hard that is to constantly be watched and scrutinized, and the pressure and the demand, and how it's not normal, and how it is harder on an individual and a person. Okay, I'm not wishing death or ill on anybody, to be clear. This is just a conversation that he brought up to me, that he noticed, okay, as a 14-year-old. And so what I'm getting at is if you're a person like Caitlin Clark, who's under immense pressure, immense scrutiny, far more than any other woman in women's basketball today, even Mulkey, the LSU coach, who just brought a bunch of attention to herself, okay, by calling out what is going to be a Washington Post article in the near future. And I understand there's something to be said for getting ahead of the story. Because when you're playing defense, in the eyes of the public, it's hard. It's much better to play offense. But I could argue that Mulkey also brought a lot more attention to an article that would have got some attention, but now it's going to get a ton of attention. My point is, Caitlin Clark is still analyzed and scrutinized more than her, okay, even at this moment in time. So when you're an extreme competitor, some of the worst sports I've ever met in my life are the most competitive people I've ever met. I was a horrible sport as a kid. Chess, checkers, I cheated to beat my mom, and sorry. Like, I was a terrible sport. Luckily, I believe I was able to keep that competitive drive, but kind of grew up a little bit. Okay. So when you're scrutinized, you got that pressure on you, you're an insane competitor, like she clearly is. There's both sides to this coin. It's still not acceptable, and it's still not okay. And her dad needs to yank her aside and tell her to shut the F up and stop complaining so much. But I do understand that she's a human being too. So I see both sides of the coin. I'm not trying to walk the fence in any way, shape, or form. Anybody who listens to me on a regular basis knows I don't do that. I'm simply saying I understand how it can be 10,000 times harder on her, so to speak, than it is maybe someone who isn't scrutinized one 1/millionth as much, however that math works, but it's still not acceptable. All right. Now, it's interesting. I've actually had this article ready to talk about on this show every week for about 3 to 4 weeks, and I'm finally going to get to it. Okay, so Cheryl Swoopes, freaking legend, okay, a while back, okay, she apologized at one point, but then said some other things after that as well. Okay, basically said a lot of things about Caitlin Clark. Now, the 52-year-old former WNBA star and legend Cheryl Swoopes, okay, went viral on social media a while back, basically talking about how Clark is a 25-year-old beating up on young kids. Not literally, but like in a basketball sense, which is inaccurate because Clark is 22. She said that Clark takes, and I quote, about 40 shots a game, end quote, which is not even close. She actually takes 22.3 field goal attempts per game for the season. Okay, 19.7 attempts for her entire career, so not even 20 attempts, not even half of what Swoopes said. And the all-time Division I scoring leader, Clark, it's interesting, because she's going to get a lot of this in the future. She's going to get a lot of it in the WNBA. I'm curious to see how she assimilates to a WNBA locker room in the future. She's the type of player that you build a locker room around, not just personnel-wise, but culture-wise, because there is going to be a lot of scrutiny. You got to have the right teammates around her in order to be able to handle that. Now, again, there was a lot of what felt like extreme negativity from Swoopes towards Clark. There was also a lot of inaccurateness, okay? She did apologize for some of it, okay? And then she kind of followed up a little bit later on. Rather than pile on, Swoopes, who briefly acknowledged on social media she was mistaken about the scoring record, but didn't walk everything back. She didn't apologize for everything. Now, here's some of Swoopes, the absolute legend, by the way, her other thoughts, and I quote, will Caitlin Clark be a good pro? Absolutely, Swoopes said. Will Caitlin Clark come into the WNBA and do what she's doing right now immediately? Absolutely not going to happen. Caitlin Clark right now probably takes about 40, this is the 40 shots a game quote, 40 shots a game. I said that because when she comes to the league, regardless of what team she goes to, that has vets on the team, she probably ain't going to get 40 shots a game. And here's the other thing that you don't want to talk about is the defense. Like, you got to guard somebody. Okay, end quote. So my final thoughts on this, and then we're just going to move to the NCAA tournament, and I'm kind of rank the 16 teams that are left in the Sweet 16. My final thought is this. Okay, if you're going to express a strong opinion, be educated. Have the facts. Have things right. Okay, and if you're going to apologize for everything. Number one, Caitlin's actually a pretty selfless player. She doesn't take anywhere near as many shots as she was accused of. And she might walk into a WNBA locker room and be the best player in that locker room. We don't know. To definitively say she's not going to do things similar to what she's doing now and definitively say absolutely not is absolutely ridiculous because you don't know. Okay, to me, it feels like there's a little bit more to this. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I can't definitively say because I don't definitively know because I don't definitively have the facts other than what I just read. All I'm saying is when I read this, back when it, 3 or 4 weeks ago came out, it felt like a little bit more than just basketball. And if you're going to express a strong opinion, you can be wrong. This is still America for now, but just have facts that are correct to back up whatever your opinion is. Those are my only thoughts. All right. Now, let's talk men's NCAA basketball tournament just a smidge. Here are the 16 teams that are left in the Sweet 16. We're going to rank them really quickly. Okay. Now, of the 16 teams still standing, I thought this was interesting, 14 were in the top 18 of the original 68-team power rankings. Okay. Including the top 7 exactly as they are right now. The exceptions were the pre-tournament number 34 team Clemson, number 47 team NC State. By the way, both ACC teams I might mention. So, as I rank these, okay, the number 16 team heading into the Sweet 16 this weekend for the men, Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, the only thing, there's some teams I'm going to dive into a little bit more. There's some teams I'm going to spend a little bit less time on. When it comes to Alabama, I'm not an Alabama fan. I'm not pro-Alabama, not anti-Alabama. I did get sick of seeing them all the time. Okay, that's just human nature unless I'm a Bama fan, which I'm not. I'm not pro, not anti. Okay, I just got tired of seeing them. So I'm kind of glad Saban's gone, simply because, not that Kalen DeBoer is not good, but there aren't too many Sabans. He's a one-on-one. They're the only collegiate programs to have a football team make the college football program and get into the NCAA Sweet 16. All right, there you go. Whether you like it or not, them's is the facts, ladies and gentlemen. Next up is NC State, number 15. Now, NC State, they may actually end up going to the SEC or Big Ten simply because, and I'll talk about this more in the future in another show, simply because North Carolina is going to go to one of them because the ACC is going to fall apart. Now, there's a small chance that the ACC is going to break off into just a 7-team conference. And that's how they'd make more money. They'd trim the fat, so to speak, and those 7 teams would not go to the Big Ten or SEC, but the 7 teams would get paid the same amount of money as all the ACC teams are getting paid right now. They just get, obviously, twice the pie, probably. And NC State would not typically be one of those 7 teams, except there's a board that has to approve North Carolina going to the Big Ten, the SEC, or leaving the ACC, and there's more NC State people on that board than there is North Carolina people. But I'll talk about that more in the future. The fact of the matter is, NC State's not going to get left behind because of their foothold on that board over NC. But that's a topic for another day. Right now, NC State, I have them number 15 out of the Sweet 16 teams that are currently formed. Next up, San Diego State. Okay. Now, I always find myself rooting for San Diego State every year. I'm not really sure why, other than they seem to always be pretty good at basketball. Okay. I am a fan of small teams getting a chance. I love the Cinderella story. So I always find myself rooting for San Diego State. I remember the Marshall Faulk days. Maybe that helps. I remember when San Diego State played, I think, number 1 Miami. Was it 1991? And there was a big brawl in the stands when they played in football. Maybe those things stick out to me. I don't really know. But I always find myself rooting for San Diego State. Next up, you got the Clemson Tigers. Okay, I believe I have number 13 here. All right. Kudos to them. Next up, you got Creighton. Now, I'm not going to J-score a ton on this, but this is a team I want to dive into just a little bit because, like Gonzaga, they're a small school that always seems to be pretty good. How they've looked so far? Deep. Not in terms of rotational depth, of course. Creighton doesn't have much of that, and they played all 3 of Baylor, Sherman, Trey Alexander, and Ryan Kalkbrenner for all but a few seconds of the double overtime win over Oregon. But they've looked deep from the field, hitting 10 triples against Akron, 15 more against Oregon. They've sometimes struggled from distance when they played away from Omaha, but they were hot in Pittsburgh last weekend. All right, their bread and butter is 3-pointers. Creighton averages 10.7 made threes per game, and is just about unbeatable when shooting at least 30% from long distance. Their Achilles heel, physicality. They're not an incredibly physical team. That's going to be the key to how far they go in the tournament. Can they stay hot? Will they play more physical? All right, next up, the Duke Blue Devils. This is a team that, when it comes to conference realignment, NC State's probably going to be included, and they won't, and that blows my mind. NC State's historically better at football. Football is king. It is what it is. They make the most money. But Duke is such a national power in basketball. Easily one of the top 8 programs of all time, historically, even without Coach Krzyzewski. But they may get left out. They may end up in the Big 12 one day. And I'll get to that in a minute. That Big 12 may ultimately be the best basketball conference in America one day. But next up is Duke. Okay, at number 10, I got Illinois. 2 Big 10 teams are left in the tournament. So I figure I should talk about them just a smidge. All right, how they've looked? Pointy. Now, as in they get a lot of points. Okay, the Illini dropped 85 on Morehead State in the first round before a remarkable 89-point performance against a good Duquesne defense in the second round. But what can they do next as the competition gets tougher? Illinois has scored at least 85 points in 10 of their last 13 games. Their bread and butter is relentless offense. Where do they struggle? Perimeter defense. If a team gets hot from 3-point range, they could be in trouble. But if they can limit the opposing team's 3-pointers, the team that won the Big Ten Tournament Championship could surprise some people. If they can't, they'll be in trouble. Next up, Marquette. Basketball school. See them every year in the NCAA tournament, and because of that, I'm well aware of who they are. Okay. Next up, I was going to say more, but we're going to move on. No disrespect to Marquette. I got a lot of respect for them, but I want to dive a little bit more into Gonzaga, a team that I grew up 2 hours from. I was born in Hastings, Nebraska. When I was 3, my dad's job took me upstate of Washington, so I grew up in Tri-Cities, Richland, Pasco. Kennewick is the exact town that I grew up on. I grew up in 2 hours from Spokane, where Gonzaga is, so I grew up kind of rooting for Gonzaga. Again, kind of that Creighton underdog story. Okay, how they've looked so far? Kind of vintage. For most of the season, this was one of the worst Gonzaga teams we've seen in a while, honestly. Okay, forget about gunning for the number one, their 6th number 1 seed in program history. Did you know they've been a number 1 seed 5 times? Okay. It wasn't until the end of the regular season, we weren't even sure if the Zags would extend their 25 consecutive NCAA tournament appearance streak, but they were maybe the most impressive team of opening weekend when you think about dominating a highly actually thought of McNeese State team. I know that sounds funny. And an annual title contender and probably one of the top 3 college basketball programs in the country year in and year out over the decades. And Kansas beat them by 21 points, I might add. The bread and butter, they own the paint. Okay. Their Achilles heel, defending the 3. All right, next up, ladies and gentlemen, the Iowa State Cyclones. I got them number 7. We're going to start speeding it up just a little bit. Next up, I got the Tennessee Volunteers. All right. Next up, the Arizona Wildcats. Now, I'll be honest with you. This is the current Big 12 team. This is one of my Final Four teams. All right, they're a number 2 seed in the tournament. I have them as one of my Final Four teams. All right, you go up next to North Carolina. Here's the interesting about North Carolina. The average age of their starting 5 is 22.2 years old. The average age of Oklahoma City Thunder, the NBA team starting 5, is 22.6 years old. This is about the most veteran team in the entire tournament field, let alone the Sweet 16. All right, next up, you got the Houston Cougars. Okay. They had a great game versus A&M. A&M's incredibly athletic, fast, explosive, physical. I don't think enough people knew how good they were. The A&M made a comeback, hit a shot at the buzzer to send the game versus Houston into overtime. Now, A&M had lost by 4 points to Houston earlier this year in December. They ended up losing by 5 in overtime in a great game. Houston's a legit title contender. Next up, you've got Purdue. The other Big Ten teams, I should probably talk about them just a smidge. How they've looked. Motivated. Like, let's light this candle. Bring it on, and unafraid. The first half of the opener against Grambling State was maybe a little too close for comfort, but the Boilermakers eventually cruised to a 28-point victory over the Tigers. Then they destroyed Utah State by nearly 40 points. Okay. Now, this is a team, everyone thinks of Zach Edey. They got 5 returning starters from last year's team. Everyone thinks the defending National Player of the Year, the current Big Ten Player of the Year, Zach Edey, 7'4". But here's the thing. I could argue the strength of their team is 3-point shooting. Okay. You can send the double team down low to Zach Edey. Okay. But you got guys like Fletcher Lawyer, Mason Gills, Braden Smith, all shooting at least 44% from the 3-point arc, and they have made at least 53 pointers each. Now, their Achilles heel, so to speak, facing physical perimeter defenses, which honestly should open it up for Zach Edey down low. My number 1 team, I'm not going out on a limb, and I'm not going to apologize. My team that I predict to win the NCAA tournament, the defending champs, the favorites coming into the tournament, the UConn Huskies. Okay. They have looked really good so far as the clear favorite, and I don't think they've really done anything to change the fact that they're the favorite to win the championship. Now, some final thoughts today before we get out of here. It was interesting because UConn was in the AAC for a minute. I actually think it hurt their women's program. Now they're a part of the Big East. I wonder if one day they could go to the Big 12. And this is what I was alluding to earlier. Because the Big 12, right now, they're the 3rd best football conference, okay, which isn't half bad. At least they still exist. The Pac-12 doesn't. ACC has no idea if they're going to. I don't think they will, unless they do that magical little 7-team mini-conference thing, which I don't know. I hope they don't. It's not going to be near as competitive as the other conferences. But the Big 12 could do this. All right, we're number 3 in football. Let's be number 1 in basketball. Let's go get UConn. Nobody wants Duke. Let's take them. We already got Arizona. We already got Kansas. We already got Houston. My point is, those are Houston's number 1 seed right now. UConn's number 1 seed right now. Then you've got Arizona, Duke, and Kansas. Potentially year in and year out. Every single year, potential number 1 or 2 seeds in the NCAA tournament every single year. Wouldn't be too bad a thing. Hey, if we can't compete with the Big Ten and SEC outright in football, let's take over number 1 in basketball. Final thought on Purdue. I predict the national championship game is UConn-Houston or UConn-Purdue. I know, I'm going way out on a limb with this. Whatever. Okay, I mentioned they returned the player of the year in Zach Edey, 7'4", all 5 starters. Okay, they have a lot of experience. Of the 175 starts from last year, they returned 169 of those. They have to be extremely motivated. As you know, I'm sure, they're only the 2nd number 1 seed ever last year to lose to a number 16 seed in Fairleigh Dickinson. Okay, and the last team that did that was Virginia, went on to win the NCAA tournament national championship the next year. So they've got to be incredibly motivated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Big Ten Show. As always, check out Jacobs at Seed, your healthy hybrid advantage. And until next time, this has been the Big Ten Show. Have a great day. We'll see you again.